Okay, I think we're going. There we go. All right, hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Lynch, and this is my session, A Disgraceful Blot, Divorce in Oklahoma Territory. Yeah, so welcome. All righty, let me go ahead and get this stuff kind of set up, and I can start doing my screen share and there we go. Okay, so I should be up here in the corner. This thing should be, okay, I think that this will be where I want to stay. Let me do a test. Cool, okay. Like I said, the title of this, A Disgraceful Blot, Divorce in Oklahoma Territory. This is a presentation for the 2021 Oklahoma History Conference, and as I said, my name is Jennifer Lynch. All right, so this all came out, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible. This came out of my graduate research when I discovered what a divorce mill was, thanks to Linda Wilson's Chronicles of Oklahoma article over Helen Churchill Candy, a woman who came to Oklahoma in the 1890s to get a divorce. But because of that, I learned that there was kind of this phenomenon that happened in the American West during the 1880s, 1890s, in which certain communities kind of revealed themselves to be a quote unquote divorce mill, meaning that they had more liberal divorce laws than, say, our larger communities in the East, like New York. Philadelphia was a largely responsible for sending a lot of people west to get divorces. But so, and I will explain all of this as we go, but so just loosely describing a divorce mill, it's a community that becomes known for the amount of divorce seekers that wind up there, okay? So this sent me into some years of research. It's a topic I'm still interested in and continuing to research. But looking at this cover photo here, I will backtrack real quick. It turns out it is hard to find images depicting divorce. So rather, I kind of had to look for depictions of emotions. So depending on how you view divorce, one might either be heartbroken or jubilant. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end too. We'll kind of do some comparisons, but this is specifically supposed to be a depiction of a woman in the middle of a divorce. But so you'll see representations of very sad women, and that's kind of the theme with depictions of divorce in art of this time. Okay, moving right along. So like I said, here is my nice little cover page. Okay, so early divorce. Looking at within the boundaries of modern day Oklahoma, looking at indigenous accounts of divorce, the term divorce doesn't really come about until we get to the Dawes Commission. So this Western idea of marriage and divorce doesn't exist within those lines so much. But accounts of quote unquote divorce, the way we understand it now, when I was doing my graduate research, I was able to find a couple of accounts from Chickasaw and Cherokee women. And this came out of OU's Western Heritage Collection. So these came from accounts from the 1930s, basically saying that divorce in these communities existed to the extent that if a woman wanted to divorce her husband, she would put his belongings outside, and that was the end of it, okay? So those accounts do exist out there, but like I said, this construction of a divorce, like I said, the way we know it, it doesn't come about until we get up until the late 1800s, okay? But so, our first recorded divorce that we have coming out of the British colonies is documented from 1639 between the Luxford couple. So Mr. and Mrs. James Luxford, which Mrs. Luxford unfortunately remained unnamed in this account. So the Mrs., but it turned out that James was already married. And so Mrs. Luxford discovered this, filed a petition for a divorce, and received it. Within that, she was granted £100 in payment. He was sent to the stocks, and then he was banished back to England, okay? So 1639, first documented divorce case happening in the Western Hemisphere, okay? Within the Plymouth colony, there were 9 legal cases between 1620 and 1691 when they dissolved into Massachusetts Bay Colony. So like I said, 9 legal divorce cases. Who knows how many poor man's divorce we have, which is just desertion, things like that. But at least 9 that we know of, right? Okay. Sticking with Massachusetts just for a moment and looking at the Luxford couple, the reason she was able to receive her petition was largely because there was a large Puritan community there. So we have our Calvinists, our Lutherans, and they viewed divorce as more of a civil issue. It was acceptable in extreme cases. And because it was a civil issue, this affected the larger community, okay? So people in toxic unions should be able to dissolve that. It's better for them, it's better for the community. So that's kind of their mentality towards it all. Also, women were able to retain their dowries, which is pretty progressive. And the grounds that were acceptable for divorce were desertion, bigamy, and impotence, okay? So that's what's going on up north. Looking at the South and our southern colonies, which were more Anglican, they viewed divorce as a religious issue. So a little less likely to receive a divorce if you petitioned in the South, okay? They wanted you to try to work it out, okay? And also, this division goes back to Henry VIII and his divorce, okay? Sorry, my phone's ringing. Turn that off. So all of this goes back across the pond, okay? So views on divorce coming to the colonies will set the tone for a lot of inconsistent growth on how we view divorce. But so those divides are pretty clear. Okay, like I said, inconsistent growth. It's viewed differently depending on which colony you're in. When these become states, that continues, okay? Also, looking at the statistics that we have from these areas in this time, these reflect European American unions, okay? Legal systems often refuse to recognize African American unions, and looking back at indigenous couples, like I said, the European model of a legal system is not in place at this point in time, okay? So the numbers are not totally representative, but at least of European American marriages, they are. Okay, so, all right, early nationhood. The first push of westward expansion we have is into what we know as the Old Northwest, the Ohio River Valley, so Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, okay? And as this happens, the first community that becomes known for its lax divorce laws is Indiana, okay? Yeah, so I marked here, it's territorial eras 1800 to 1816, but when it becomes a divorce mill is in the 1840s and 1850s. So it's a state. The rest of these we'll look at their divorce mill pinnacle comes during territorial eras, but so this one's a little different, but this is the first one to become known as a divorce mill, like I said. Again, looking back at our religious division that I mentioned a minute ago, there's a large Protestant population going to Indiana. So there's the view of divorce being a civil issue kind of broadly accepted, okay? Also, many people believed that frontier liberalism accounted for the acceptance of divorce overall. And also the reason that divorce mills are able to thrive as they do, starting here, it all comes down to residency requirements. So in Indiana, there was no residency requirement until 1859. But this meant that people could show up, and the moment they stepped foot on that territory, they can deem themselves a bona fide citizen, and there you are, okay? So you could go there, boom, you get your citizenship, you can file for a divorce against, you know, your wife in New York who didn't want to come with you, and that's that, all right? You could immediately get it filed. If it's successful, then you're divorced. You can do whatever you want there, it's done, okay? So that makes for easy divorces, right? And then on top of that, the grounds that were acceptable for a divorce were drunkenness, cruelty, non-support, and incompatibility. So those are 4 grounds. Whenever I talk about Easterners going west for divorce, like I said, New York and Philadelphia I see a lot of people leaving. And the reason that happened was because specifically in those areas, there was one ground that was acceptable to file for divorce, and that was physical abuse with proof, okay? So whenever you start seeing these areas that have multiple grounds for divorce, that is a good thing, okay? And we'll see more and more grounds joining lists like this as we continue and move west, okay? But so Indiana, Indianapolis, our first divorce mill, all right? Boom. In addition, I almost forgot about this. Okay, so in addition to the other grounds for divorce that they have, they also come up with an omnibus clause in 1824. So this acts as a catch-all, and it stated that divorce petitions were acceptable for any ground, for any reason, any misconduct that permanently destroys the happiness of the petitioner and defeats the purpose of the marriage relation. So very broad. This will bring many people out to Indiana, okay? Yeah, and going off of what I said, most Eastern communities, that the only ground you could apply for was under physical abuse with proof. Okay, so Indiana is the first to extend the definition of cruelty to go beyond physical abuse to include psychological as well. Okay, so moving on. Like I said, that's happening in the 1840s, 1850s. Civil War happens, and big surprise, divorce leaves the conversation, okay? We're not worried about that right now. This creates a generation of widows. Coming out of the war, looking into Reconstruction, marriage severely declined because people were just traumatized by this experience. And so marriage and divorce, like I said, not part of the conversation for quite a while. Going off of that, in addition to, you know, like I said, marriage numbers are lower because people are processing this experience of war that they've just come out of. We start to look at industrialization also. There are expanding roles for women. Marrying ages increase, so people are marrying at older ages. Looking for education and self-reliance before family. Okay, so industrialization, like I said, urbanization, railroad expansion, which will be the theme, you know, for the upcoming decades, which will impact legislation as we move further west. Okay, and as we get more into westward migration, 1880s on, there's a big push, especially in the Central Plains, which we'll see. But with this migration movement, the issue of migratory divorce, or people going west specifically to get divorces in these mill communities, becomes a larger social issue. And we have the rise of moral groups and anti-divorce leagues, stuff like that. So we will get into that as we go. All right. Okay. Looking at our Western territories, like I said, a lot of this comes down to residency requirements and issues within that. And the reason they were kept so short was because these territories wanted voting rights for workers because the more people you can get in your area, the quicker that leads to statehood, all of these things. But so people wanted short residency requirements to get workers into these areas, but, well, and I have a quote right here. So this is from Nelson Blake, who is a divorce historian, but wrote The Road to Reno. So within that, he said, an easy voting qualifications found their logical corollaries and easy requirements for beginning lawsuits, okay? So divorce lawyers are kind of attributed for causing this, but they realized that, hey, if people could show up, you know, and get your residency for the sake of working, yes, you could come out here and also get a divorce. So this becomes promoted. You can see examples of advertisements in newspapers that were being posted by lawyers. But so this all becomes its own industry within itself, okay? All right, so yeah, voting rights lead to divorce suits. Like I said, Indiana was our first hub, 1840s, 1850s. Civil War squashes that conversation. And then coming back, 1870s, especially railroad expansion. Utah, there's a lot of stuff going on in Utah, a lot of workers going out, and it will become a divorce mill of its time, 1870s. Again, no residency requirement there, so it became very easy for people to get divorces. And then as we move into the 1880s, like I said, we would get into the Central Plains, but then the Dakotas become the next hotspot. So the 1880s sees the Dakotas pop up, okay? And as all of this is happening, the 49th Congress, who is responsible for the Dawes Act and the Dawes Rules and our Dawes Commission, they also focus on, like I said, Utah and what is going on there. But under the guise of being concerned about polygamy and divorce, while all of that is happening, the Wright Report, as it becomes known, is issued. So a report on marriage and divorce in the United States, 1867 to 1886. Yeah, like I said, it's commissioned by the 49th Congress. Carroll D. Wright, who was the Commissioner of Labor, was the one who was put in charge of this. And here, so that's a picture of him. This is our insert from the publication itself. Okay, so adopted at the beginning of March 1887 to collect marriage and divorce statistics for the previous 20 years. Like I said, Carroll Wright was in charge of this. And so the study went on from March 1887 and it was released February of 1889. All right. And so some of the things that it revealed to the public about marriage and divorce numbers. Alrighty, so in 1867, so coming out of the Civil War, the amount of divorces that were filed nationally, it was, just under 10,000. So by 1886, that's up to 25,000. And looking at this next bullet point, although the population increased 30%, divorce itself increased 79%. And this, so now bumping back up to that first number, this increase shows 157% of an increase overall, okay? Let's see, so the grounds for divorce that I talked about, the most popular one that was filed was desertion. It said poor man's divorce, and especially during this whole period of westward migration, okay, this makes sense, right? People are moving. So desertion is our number one cause, followed by adultery, then cruelty, drunkenness, and neglect to provide. And also within this report, it revealed that 2/3 of all cases were filed by women. This will be hard to digest for a lot of our moral groups. They will come to blame women for what becomes known as the Victorian Divorce Crisis. But so this number is kind of revealed for the first time within the study. Okay, and 20% of all cases occurred in other states from where the couples were first married, which again, we're in a phase of westward migration, so that makes sense that that's happening. But of the divorces that were believed to be migratory, meaning that couples specifically went elsewhere to get a divorce, those numbers vary between 3 to 10%. And it can be kind of tricky to gauge because when people were filing their petitions, they might not have been totally honest about being a migratory case because they were worried about repercussions and that they might not get their divorce if, you know, the judge knew that it was migratory. So a lot of people didn't openly talk about that. So it can be a little hard to gauge sometimes, but it's kind of estimated now that up to 10%. So. All righty. Okay, so we finally get to Oklahoma Territory. I know I titled this about being solely of Oklahoma Territory, but I had to get to all of that first, all right? So like I said, this report, the Wright Report, is released in February of 1889, okay? All right, so backtracking just a little bit. So Congress had amended the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871, allowing for homesteads in what was newly deemed Oklahoma Territory. All right, this, now that's a broad generalization, but this is what creates the space for the land run to occur, all right? The land run, it's officially signed into action, so March 3rd, 1889, all right? So a few weeks after the Wright Report is being released. Okay, the first of our 5 land runs that occurs here in Oklahoma takes place on April 22nd, 1889. And I'd hit on this before, but there's an abundance of lawyers that show up, okay? This mostly has to do with land disputes to begin with. You know, there was a lot of confusion coming out of the land run. Some claims were made in duplicate or triplicate because you're just marking a plot of land, so that was confusing. So there's an abundance of lawyers here to settle those land disputes. And as time passes, all those disputes are settled. And so our lawyers end up staying and pivot to divorce law, all right? Sorry, I need a little drink. Okay, so May of 1890, the Organic Act is passed by Congress. So this is our first legal document, governing body, okay? So within the Organic Act, and then a territorial code that had been passed prior, jurisdiction to settle divorce cases was given to both district and probate courts, which probate courts settle things like estates after people pass away, so it's more like family law. Okay, but so district courts and probate courts could both settle divorce laws. So this becomes super confusing on who's it supposed to be in charge. And so, you know, people are going to both courts to get divorces. So this happens, this will go on for a while, all right? How the early laws were so confusing is because they were, you know, kind of quilted together from other legislation. So it was picked from Nebraska laws and California laws. So that's how. Although going back to our issues of residency requirements, I will say that Oklahoma Territory did have a 90-day residency requirement. So it's pretty progressive, okay? Although to make things easier and, you know, to exacerbate things, they allowed for the ability to serve notice through publication, meaning if you're in Guthrie, you can post in the Guthrie Daily Leader that you want to divorce your spouse in Philadelphia, and that works, okay? It can be a locally circulating publication, and that was fine. So that happened, okay. And then here we see our list of causation, which is, you know, again, kind of growing. So adultery, extreme cruelty, which included mental and physical abuse, pardon me. Desertion, which included the refusal of a spouse to relocate to the territory. And then neglect, impotence, and a felony conviction, right? So. Alrighty, so like I said, confusion in those laws kind of allows a divorce mill to thrive. And really, the main years that this happened in Oklahoma Territory would be from 1890 to 1893, okay? So in 1893, Territorial Governor Abraham Shea began challenging laws, and he delivered his governor's message on January 19th of 1893, in which he referred to Oklahoma Territory as or the divorce trade in Oklahoma as a disgraceful blot, which is where I got the name for this, okay? So that was really when, you know, the tide started to turn, so to speak. Okay, so 1893, jurisdiction to settle cases is given exclusively to district courts. The 90-day residency requirement was set. 10 grounds for divorce remain, okay? And divorces were granted 6 months after their initial filing to prohibit immediate remarriage, okay? So you had to wait it out. So between 1890 and 1897, there were a little more than 1,000 divorces that took place in Oklahoma Territory, okay? So depending on how you view that number, you know, it's argued, was Oklahoma Territory a mill? Was it not? I argued that it was, in fact. Okay, and the reason I argue that it was a mill and a significant one is because it ended up being the last one that was able to thrive during this era, leading up to 1900, basically. Okay. But yeah, so, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But so the significance of it all, okay. But Congress established a territorial 1-year residency requirement in 1896, all right. And that's kind of considered to be the end of the divorce crisis, so to speak. But it goes on until 1906, when the National Congress on Uniform Divorce Laws met in Washington, D.C., in which, let's see, 100 delegates from 40 different states got together to promote the idea of, well, uniform divorce laws. Okay, so, yeah, this happens. Basically, nothing comes of it, as we know. So divorce laws still vary state to state, but after that, they got it out of their system for the most part, and that marked the end of the divorce crisis as it was deemed. Looking forward into the 20th century, Nevada is considered to be a divorce mill today, you know, since Vegas is the marriage mill, like end of that. So the state as itself as a mill for marriage and divorce kind of still stands, I guess. But what's this? Okay, so yeah, my last point. So why is it significant? Why was it a mill, right? Like I said, it was the last one to thrive before federal changes were made. When federal changes were being made, Oklahoma Territory was used as a very specific example. Yeah, I wrote that. I feel like it was a direct consequence of the Dawes and then the Edmunds-Tucker Acts, which the Edmunds-Tucker Act was the Dawes role equivalent for the Mormon community in Utah, which I kind of hit on a little bit. And ultimately, I feel like the Victorian Divorce Crisis did help bring about the conversation of divorce that ultimately helped a lot of people leave abusive and toxic unions. So I do think that it is significant in that sense. Okay, so let me see. I should hopefully have enough time. I'll try to do this quickly. But like I said, depicting divorce is hard, so you kind of have to play off of emotion. But so depending on how you view divorce, there's that. But so here is a sad situation, a French piece from 1892, divorce. And then to juxtapose that, we have, oh my goodness, Queen Victoria. There we go. Queen Victoria's fourth daughter or fourth child, Gertrude Elizabeth Blood. This was taken after her divorce. She looks perfectly fine. So, like I said, it depends on how you view it. Also, there we go. These are from magazines, some divorce court images. So is marriage a failure as a rule? Yes. But anyway, so there's that. And I'm sending this out, so everyone should hopefully have this and you can go back and spend some time with it. It's a political cartoon of a couple going for divorce. You see her party, they're behind her. Okay. And then in music, again, I like this picture over here on the left because it has the masks again. What's the emotion? That's up to you. Subjective, right? Okay. And then here is my bibliography. Okay, so my archival materials, my government documents, newspapers, published primary sources, and then my secondary sources, mentioned some of these. Okay, but that's it. So let me see how I'm doing, get out of here. Okay, thank you so much for having me. If anyone has any questions, my email is attached there and hopefully it will be accessible. I hope that this works and I just appreciate your support and time in watching this presentation. So thank you and have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.